The night erupted in chaos. Screams, gunfire, and flashing lights. I pulled the trigger, and the sharp crack of the rifle cut through the suffocating darkness. The man with the crowbar, a dark figure cloaked in black, staggered back as the bullet tore through his shoulder. His scream was so shrill it seemed to pierce the very night itself. The metal rod he had been swinging toward my wife dropped to the ground as he fell. Laura stood frozen, Emma clutching her tightly, her hands shaking so violently that I feared she might drop our daughter. Behind me, Luke sobbed, his small hands gripping the back of my jeans, his fear instinctive but incomprehensible. I placed myself between them and the bleeding man now writhing in the dirt, my heart hammering so loudly it drowned out the growing chaos around us. Sirens screamed in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. Red and blue lights splashed across the trees at the edge of the ranch in manic bursts. The sharp commands of law enforcement cut through the noise, but for a moment, everything slowed down. The rifle felt heavy in my hands, sweat dripping from my brow, a mixture of fear and rage coursing through me. My family was behind me, and this man had crossed every line. I knew I had no choice. Then, as clearly as I knew the sun would rise after the darkest night, a voice boomed. Drop the weapon, hands in the air. The command hit like a thunderclap. Blinding spotlights pinned me down, forcing me to squint, and I could barely make out the figure shouting the order. My instinct screamed at me to stay between my family and the threat, to protect them. But another voice inside warned me that misunderstanding could turn deadly in an instant. Slowly, reluctantly, I lowered the rifle to the dirt and raised my hands above my head. Boots crunched on the gravel as deputies poured onto property, guns trained on me. I heard Laura sobbing my name, trying to explain, to tell them I wasn't the danger, that I had only done what any man would do to protect his wife and children from a lunatic with a crowbar. Cold handcuffs snapped tight around my wrists, and one deputy, his voice oddly steady amid the chaos, told me I was being detained for discharging a firearm during a domestic disturbance. Domestic disturbance. The words echoed bitterly in my mind. This wasn't a family fight gone wrong. This was an attack. This was war waged on my home by people who thought they could intimidate us, control us. They had no right to be here. They ignored every no trespassing sign, every fence, every warning. And now, because I dared defend my family, I was the one in cuffs. As they led me toward the squad car, I caught a glimpse of the man I had shot, being loaded onto a stretcher, his face twisted in pure hatred. Not fear, not pain, but hatred. His eyes burned into mine, promising that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. My stomach twisted. Laura stood just beyond the flashing lights, holding both kids tightly. Her eyes were red with fear and fury. Emma was still crying to her mother's shoulder, and Luke, brave little Luke, stood stiffly, his tiny fists clenched as if ready to fight the world. "Is Daddy going to jail?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the noise. I couldn't answer. I just bowed my head as they shoved me into the back of the cruiser and slammed the door. The drive to the sheriff's station seemed endless. Each second felt like a punch to the gut. I replayed the night's events over and over in my mind, wondering if I could have done anything differently. But the truth rang louder than any doubt. If I hadn't acted, if I had hesitated, that man's crowbar would have struck Laura. It could have been so much worse. At the station, I was placed in a small holding room with just a metal chair and a table bolted to the floor. I sat there, staring at the cracked concrete walls, straining to hear any sounds from outside, desperate to know if my family was safe. Hours passed before the door finally creaked open. A man in a white shirt and tie stepped in. His face was weathered, serious. Sheriff Randall. I recognized him from town meetings and charity events. The kind of man who'd seen enough of the worst in people to never be surprised by it again. He sat down across from me, folded his hands on the table, and looked me square in the eye. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, his voice low but firm, "we've reviewed your security footage." My heart stopped. I'd almost forgotten about the cameras I'd installed after the first round of threats. The cameras I'd hoped would never be needed, but had put up anyway, just in case. Sheriff Randall continued, "It's clear you gave a verbal warning. You tried to de-escalate. The man charged you with a deadly weapon. You fired one shot. You did everything by the book. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, slumping in the chair as relief washed over me. I wasn't in jail. I wasn't going to be separated from my family for defending them. But even as that relief flooded through me, a deeper anger bubbled up. This wasn't supposed to happen. We were supposed to be safe on our land, the place we built for our children, a haven of open skies and fresh air, not caught in some insane battle over property lines. Sheriff Randall leaned forward, his eyes hardening. "Listen carefully," he said. "This group you're dealing with, they're dangerous. They're connected. Tonight was just the beginning." He told me that the HOA wasn't just a bunch of neighbors obsessed with lawn care and mailbox colors. No, it was part of something bigger, a private development group using the HOA to pressure homeowners' off-key properties, land they needed for a new energy corridor. My ranch sat right in the middle of their plans. They weren't going to stop just because of one failed attack. If anything, tonight's failure would make them more desperate. Sheriff Randall urged us to stay alert, document everything, and never let our guard down again. When they finally released me, Laura was waiting outside in our old pickup truck. The kids were asleep in the back seat. She rushed into my arms the second she saw me, sobbing into my chest. I held her tightly, pressing my forehead into her hair, feeling the frantic rhythm of her heart against mine. We didn't speak for a long moment. There were no words of the fear, anger, and exhaustion that weighed us down. When she finally pulled back to look at me, her eyes were fierce. "We're not running," she said. "They're not taking our home." I nodded. There was nothing else to say. We had made our stand tonight, and deep in my gut, I knew it was just the beginning of a much larger fight. Life on the ranch had once been simple, almost dreamlike. Before all of this, before all the madness started, our days were filled with the kind of peace most people only hear about in country songs. I'd spend my mornings fixing fences or tending to the livestock, while Laura baked pies in the kitchen, filling the house with a warm scent of cinnamon and butter. Luke and Emma ran wild to the fields, their laughter echoing under the vast blue Texas sky. Evenings were spent around campfires, roasting marshmallows and telling tall tales beneath the sky, so clear you could see the Milky Way stretching across the heavens. This was the life we dreamed of when we left behind the noise and suffocation of the suburbs. No more strict homeowners associations nitpicking about the color of our door or the height of our grass. We had specifically chosen this piece of land because it was outside the reach of any HOA jurisdiction. At least, that's what we thought. It all started with a letter. At first glance, it seemed innocent enough, just a plain envelope with no return address. Laura handed it to me after the mail run, her brow furrowed. I opened it and skimmed through the contents, my mouth twisting into confusion. The letter claimed we were in violation of Section B Code 17 and instructed us to remove unauthorized livestock within 14 days. I laughed it off, sure it was just some mistake. Maybe they had confused our address with someone else's. After all, our deed clearly stated that we were outside any HOA's reach. I tossed the letter into the trash, not thinking much of it. A week later, another letter arrived. This one had a much more aggressive tone. It threatened legal action and property liens if we didn't comply. The language was sharp and accusatory, ending with a curt final warning. A prickle of unease started to form, and I began to sense that this wasn't some bureaucratic mix-up. This was something more deliberate. I decided to call the number listed at the bottom of the letter. After being transferred several times and placed on hold 3 different occasions, a woman finally answered. Her voice was polished, dismissive, exactly the tone you expect from bureaucrats. I calmly explained that my property wasn't part of their HOA, that we were clearly outside the designated zones according to community map and my deed. She interrupted me with an edge of irritation. If your property shares access roads with HOA-regulated homes, then you fall under our jurisdiction by association. I blinked, stunned. My driveway is private, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. It's part of my land, not a shared road. It's carved into my deed. I own it. She cut me off again, her voice hard and final. We will be following up. The line went dead. leaving me standing there with the phone in my hand, a chill creeping down my spine, despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an attack. A deliberate, calculated move. But why? We had only just moved in, kept to ourselves, caused no trouble. What could they possibly want from us? Weeks passed without any more letters, but the silence fell heavy, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Then one afternoon, while I was fixing a section of fence near the barn, Luke came running toward me, wide-eyed and panting. "Dad, there's a man outside taking pictures," he shouted. I dropped my tools and rushed to the front of the property. Sure enough, there he was, a pudgy man in khaki pants and a tucked-in polo shirt, clipboard in hand, snapping pictures of our barn, our livestock, even our mailbox. Fury boiled up inside me. "Hey!" I shouted, striding toward him. "You're trespassing." He didn't flinch. Instead, he flashed me a smug, oily smile. "Compliance inspection," he said casually, as if that explained everything. "Get off my land." I growled, closing the distance between us. He muttered under his breath, "You'll regret this attitude," and snapped one last photo of my truck's license plate before heading to his vehicle, parked haphazardly near our front gate. I watched him drive away, dust swirling in his wake, my fists clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. That night, I bolted every door and window, a sick feeling gnawing at my gut. There was something about that man, the way he carried himself, the sneer in his voice. It told me this was far from over. I was right. The next morning, we found a neon pink notice taped to our front gate. Final warning: remove unauthorized structures or fines may exceed $5,000. Laura stood beside me, clutching the paper, her hands trembling. Her face was pale, eyes wide with fear. "We can't ignore this anymore," she whispered. "What if they really try to take the ranch?" I tried to reassure her, but my own confidence was starting to crack. These people weren't playing by any rules we understood. They were making up their own game, and we were losing. I told her I'd get a lawyer, someone who could make this go away. But in my heart, I knew we were already in too deep. Hiring Mr. Cole was the smartest thing I did. He was a scrappy, sharp-tongued attorney who had seen his fair share of property disputes. When I showed him the letters, the photos, the pink notices, he flipped through them with growing disgust. "You're not crazy," he said, tapping the last letter with his pen. "Your deed is airtight. They have no legal claim over your property. What they're doing is harassment. Plain and simple." But he leaned back, rubbing his jaw. "They're not going to stop. They'll use intimidation, fake fines, phony lawsuits. They're hoping you'll crack under pressure, sell and get out. And if we don't," I asked, bracing myself for the answer. "They'll escalate," he said grimly. That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the hills. The sky was painted in bruised purples and fiery oranges. Luke and Emma chased each other around the oak tree out back, their laughter ringing out like tiny bells. Laura sat beside me, knitting a scarf for winter, her brow furrowed in thought. That they weren't just enforcing some petty rule. They were after the land itself, our home, our dream. They wouldn't stop until they had it, and if I didn't fight with everything I had, they might just win. I looked out over the fields, the barn, and the house we had poured our blood, sweat, and savings into, making a silent promise that they would not drive us off this land. They could throw everything they had at us, but we were not going to back down. Not now, not ever. This ranch was more than just property. It was our sanctuary, our future, and I was ready to defend it, whatever it took. For a while, it seemed like the storm had passed. After the confrontation with the man taking pictures, after hiring Mr. Cole and getting our paperwork in perfect order, the attack stopped. No more letters, no more random inspections, no more pink warning signs taped to the gate. Laura allowed herself to believe it was over. I wanted to believe it too, but in the pit of my stomach, I knew better. The kind of people who would stoop to harassment and intimidation didn't just give up. They got smarter, sneakier. They waited for you to let your guard down before coming back twice as hard. That feeling of unease kept me restless. I started double-checking every lock before bed, walking the perimeter of the ranch at night with a flashlight, and Max, our old German shepherd, by my side. Laura teased me gently about it at first, calling me her personal cowboy security detail. But I saw the worry in her eyes, too. She knew I wasn't being paranoid, not after everything that had already happened. Then one night, the silence shattered. It was a humid evening, the kind where the air feels thick and heavy, and thunder rumbled low in the distance. We were getting ready for movie night. The kids already in their pajamas, popcorn popping in the kitchen. Laura had just queued up one of those old animated classics on the TV when everything went black. The house groaned in sudden silence as the lights flickered out. Emma squealed in surprise, clutching Laura's leg, and Luke immediately bolted for the hallway, thinking it was some kind of prank. I grabbed the big flashlight from the coat closet and stepped outside. As soon as the door swung open, a sick feeling washed over me. Something was wrong. It wasn't just a house that had lost power. It was a whole property. The security lights along the barn were out, and the little lampposts lining the driveway were dark. I swung the flashlight beam toward the utility box on the side of the house and froze. The breaker panel had been ripped clean off, wires dangling like limp noodles, sparking slightly in the muggy air. Someone had done this. Someone had been here. I scanned the dirt near the house and spotted fresh tire tracks, cutting deep into the soft ground, leading straight toward the back gate. I felt Max stiffen beside me, his low growl vibrating against my leg. I didn't need any more evidence. They had come onto my land. They had touched my home. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I hurried back inside, locking the doors behind me, and gathered Laura and the kids in the living room. I tried to explain in a way that wouldn't terrify them, but there was no sugarcoating the truth. Someone had sabotaged us. Laura's face went pale as she hugged the kids close. I told her that from now on, the kids weren't allowed outside alone, not even play in the front yard. She nodded without argument. That night, I sat awake in the darkened living room, rifle across my lap, Max lying at my feet. I watched the shadows move across the windows, listening to every creak and rustle with sharpened nerves. A few nights later, the next attack came. It started with a noise, sharp, metallic, unmistakable. A loud clang, like something heavy hitting metal, echoed across the yard. I bolted upright, heart racing, and nudged Max awake. He was already alert, ears perked, nose twitching. I crept to the front door and peered through the side window. In the faint moonlight, I saw them, 3 figures moving near the barn. One of them carried something that gleamed under the moonlight, a crowbar. My blood turned to ice. I moved quickly, whispering to Laura to get the kids into the safe room we had installed after the earlier threats. She didn't argue. She scooped up Emma, grabbed Luke by the hand, and disappeared into the back hallway. Her footsteps were soft but urgent. I loaded the rifle and stepped outside onto the porch. The boards creaked under my boots, drawing the attention of the men near the barn. I raised my voice, firm and commanding. "You're trespassing on private property. Leave now or face the consequences." One of the figures hesitated, then turned and bolted into the darkness beyond the barn. But the other 2 stood their ground. One of them shouted back, his voice slurred with anger. "You think you're above the law, you piece of trash? You're going to pay for disrespecting the HOA." It was Peterson. I recognized his voice even before he stepped closer into the light spilling from the porch. The crowbar glinted in his hand. Without warning, he broke into a sprint, not toward me, but toward the house, toward the door Laura had just closed behind her. Instinct took over. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I fired. The rifle's report thundered through the night. Peterson cried out, spinning and dropping the crowbar as he crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by a sharp yelp of pain and the distant barking of dogs across the countryside. Then came the sirens. Red and blue lights blazed through the trees, illuminating the chaos with an almost surreal glow. Deputies poured onto property, shouting commands, weapons drawn. I set my rifle down slowly, hands raised high, praying they would see I wasn't a threat. Laura flung open the door, screaming that I was protecting them, that we were the victims, not the attackers. In the confusion, I was cuffed and separated from my family as they led me toward the squad cars. I caught a glimpse of Peterson being loaded onto a stretcher. His face was twisted, not in pain, but in rage. He mouthed something at me, words I couldn't hear, but at the station, I sat through hours of questioning. Luckily, the security cameras had captured everything: the sabotage, the trespassing, the attack. Sheriff Randall reviewed the footage himself, his mouth tightening into a grim line. "You did everything right," he said eventually, releasing me with a pat on the shoulder. But he warned me. His voice was heavy. "These people aren't just petty rule enforcers. They've got money, they got connections, and they're not going to let this go easy." I returned home exhausted but relieved. The sun just starting to rise over the horizon. Laura met me at the door, her eyes red from crying but fierce with determination. We sat together on the porch steps, holding hands as the world slowly brightened around us. In the distance, the barn loomed, silent and scarred from the night's violence. We were still standing, but the war for our home had only just begun. The morning after the attack felt surreal. The rising sun cast long shadows across the battered barn and the rutted driveway, where sheriff's deputies had parked the night before. Laura brewed coffee in the kitchen, her hands shaking so badly she spilled some across the counter, but she said nothing. I sat at the table, staring blankly at a half-eaten piece of toast, while Luke and Emma played quietly in the living room, still too young to understand the full weight of what had happened. My mind churned with thoughts of what would come next. Peterson would recover from the gunshot wound, no doubt, and when he did, he and the people backing him would come harder, not because they had a right, but because their pride had been wounded. These were not people who backed down when someone stood up to them. They were bullies, used to get their way through fear and intimidation. 2 days later, the first letter arrived, delivered by certified mail, thick with the scent of cheap cologne. It bore the name of some high-priced law firm from the city. I ripped it open at the kitchen table, Laura hovering behind me. The words inside twisted my stomach into knots. They were suing us. Peterson and the HOA were claiming assault with a deadly weapon, emotional distress, property damage, and a slew of other accusations designed to paint me as a violent maniac, instead of a father defending his family. Laura gasped when she read over my shoulder, pressing her hand to her mouth. "They are trying to destroy us," she whispered. I called Mr. Cole immediately, my fingers trembling with fury. He drove out to the ranch that same afternoon, spreading the papers across our kitchen table, like a general surveying a battlefield. His face tightened as he read through the papers, his expression hardening with each word. "This isn't about getting you into court, Jack," he said, his voice grim. "This is about draining you dry, bleeding your bank account with endless legal fees until you have no choice but to sell. It's not just Peterson. There's money behind this. Big money. And they're playing for keeps." I leaned forward, desperate to know what we could do. "Fight back," he said, his answer simple but powerful. "Countersue for harassment, unlawful trespass, emotional distress. File for restraining order against Peterson and the HOA. Make it clear that we won't back down." The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and meetings. Every spare moment was consumed with gathering evidence, compiling security footage, and collecting character references from neighbors, teachers, even a local vet who had known us since we first arrived. Late into the nights, Laura and I sifted through every document, cross-referencing property lines, and proving, over and over, that we had never been under the jurisdiction of the HOA. But the cost of this battle kept mounting. Legal fees, security upgrades, lost work hours. Our carefully saved-up funds, meant for the kids' college and the ranch's future improvements, were dwindling fast. But it wasn't just the financial strain that kept me awake at night. It was the constant feeling that we were being watched. Some nights, Max would bark fiercely at shadows. Other times, we'd find fresh tire tracks near the back pasture or footprints too large to belong to anyone in our family. Once, Laura discovered the front gate jarred open, despite me locking it tight before bed. The final straw came one morning when Luke found a dead rabbit hanging from the mailbox with a crude note tied to its paw that read, "Sell now or else." Laura wept as she cleaned up the mess, trying to protect the kids from the horror, While I stood there, seething with anger, my fists clenched so tightly they hurt. Mr. Cole worked tirelessly, filing motions, submitting restraining orders, pushing back against the constant legal threats. But even he admitted it felt like playing chess against an invisible opponent. Someone always 3 moves ahead. Then, one afternoon, while delivering new court documents, he sat heavily at our kitchen table, rubbing his temples. "Jack," he said slowly, "I think there's something bigger going on here. Bigger than just Peterson and the HOA." He explained that he'd uncovered references to a company called Western Horizon Development buried in some of the paperwork filed against us. They were applying for zoning changes in the area, hoping to expand utility rights and commercial corridors. Our ranch sat right in the middle of their expansion plans. Suddenly, everything clicked. The harassment, the lawsuits, the threats, it wasn't just about enforcing fake HOA rules. They were trying to steal our land. We weren't just fighting a rogue HOA. We were standing in the way of millions of dollars in profits, and they would do anything to clear the path. Laura sat beside me, pale and shaken, clutching them against her chest, while Luke played quietly at her feet, unaware of the enormity of what was happening. I realized then just how high the stakes had become. This was no longer about property lines or neighborhood disputes. This was about survival. Determined not to be caught off guard again, I reinforced every entry point on the house, installed more cameras, and added floodlights that triggered with the slightest movement. I set up nightly patrols around property, Max trotting by my side, his senses sharper than mine ever could be. I barely slept, fueled by adrenaline, anger, and the need to protect my family. Laura tried to keep life as normal as possible for kids, baking cookies, setting up art projects, reading bedtime stories with a smile that I knew cost her everything to fake. But even with all our precautions, the next attack came. One night, while patrolling near the barn, I noticed a sharp, acrid smell on the breeze. I ran toward the source and found a small stack of hay bales smoldering behind the barn, hidden from the cameras. Someone had doused them in accelerant and set them on fire, hoping the flames would spread to the structures nearby. I shouted for Laura to call 911, grabbed a shovel, and began frantically beating at the flames. Laura rushed out with a garden hose, and together we managed to douse the fire before it could spread. But the damage was done. Part of the barn was scorched, and a pile of feed was ruined. The fire chief confirmed what I already knew. It wasn't an accident. Someone had tried to burn us out. Sheriff Randall arrived shortly after, grim-faced and furious, but without concrete evidence of who had started the fire. There was little he could do. I knew in my heart it was Peterson or someone connected to him, but knowing and proving were 2 different things. That night, after the firefighters left and the smoke cleared, I sat on the porch steps with the kids huddled against me, a cold resolve settling into my bones. They had declared war. They had made it personal. And now, it wasn't just about defending our home. It was about ensuring these people could never hurt us or anyone else ever again. After the fire, the sense of violation hung over the ranch like a storm cloud. Every creak of the barn's weathered boards, every gust of wind through the trees made me tense, half expecting another attack. Laura did her best to keep the kids distracted, but they felt it too. Luke would flinch at loud noises, and Emma clung to her mother, her wide eyes constantly scanning the windows. There was no normal anymore, just an endless cycle of fear and vigilance. I slept in shifts, rifle by my side, Max stationed by the front door like a living alarm system. Every night, I replayed the security footage, obsessively checking for anything out of place. It became a way to regain control of the chaos, consuming our lives. The lawsuit continued, draining our savings and our spirit. With every passing day, court dates loomed, each one another battle in the war for our home. Mr. Cole fought like a man possessed, filing countersuits, restraining orders, doing everything he could to slow their momentum. But even he admitted it felt like trying to hold back a flood with a bucket. Then came the discovery that shook everything even further. Late one night, while combing through zoning applications and land transfer documents, Cole found a smoking gun. Horizon West Development was quietly acquiring land throughout our county. They were using shell companies, fake HOAs, and even bribing officials to redraw maps and claim private land as community property. Our ranch was a prime target, a jewel in the crown of their expansion plans. This was bigger than Peterson, bigger than the HOA. It was a corporate land grab dressed up as neighborhood regulation. Armed with this knowledge, Cole and I devised a plan. We couldn't keep playing defense. We had to expose them. We had to show the world what was really happening before they buried us in lawsuits, fires. I called in favors from old friends, people I had served with, people who knew how to set up surveillance better than any private security firm. Hidden cameras, trail sensors, even aerial drones, quietly patrolling the ranch's perimeter day and night. I documented everything. Every suspicious vehicle, every trespasser, every act of vandalism. We built an airtight case. But the enemy wasn't going to sit back and let us gather evidence without a fight. The next attack came swiftly and brutally. Around 2 a.m., Max started barking, a deep, frantic sound that pulled me from the edge of sleep. I grabbed my rifle and rushed to the window. A dark SUV was idling just beyond the tree line. 2 figures crouched by the livestock fence, one of them holding bolt cutters that gleamed in the moonlight. They were trying to breach the fence, maybe to let the animals loose, maybe for something worse. I bolted out the door, shouting for them to leave. One of them turned, something shiny gleaming in his hand. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I fired a warning shot into the dirt, inches from his feet. They dropped the cutters and bolted, disappearing into the woods, their SUV tearing away down the dirt road. Seconds later, I called Sheriff Randall. He arrived within 20 minutes, grim and tight-lipped. He took the security footage and promised to run the plates on the fleeing vehicle. But even he admitted that proving anything would be difficult. They were getting bolder, more reckless, and it was only a matter of time before someone got seriously hurt. The next day, I reinforced the fence, adding barbed wire and more cameras. Laura wanted to pack up the kids and leave for their safety, but I refused. If we ran now, they would win, and they wouldn't stop with us. They would do it to someone else, another family who just wanted to live in peace. A week later, the court date arrived. We dressed in our best clothes, Laura in a simple navy dress, me in a clean shirt and jeans. Luke and Emma stayed with a trusted neighbor, away from the madness. The courtroom was packed, reporters near the doors, curious onlookers whispering. Peterson was there too, his arm still bandaged, his face twisted into a sneer every time he looked my way. Their lawyer painted me as a violent madman, a trigger-happy cowboy who endangered the community. They waved pictures of the scorched barn, the damaged gate. Anything they could twist to make me look guilty. It was hard to sit there, hard to listen without jumping to my feet and shouting the truth. When it was our turn, Cole stood and delivered the speech of his career, calm, measured, but filled with a quiet fury that cut through their lives like a knife. He laid out the evidence, the trespassing, the harassment, the attacks, the corporate land theft scheme. He showed the security footage, grainy black and white images showing Peterson charging my wife with a crowbar, masked men sabotaging our breaker panel, the SUV fleeing after trying to cut our fence. Laura took the stand next. Her voice trembled but never faltered. She spoke of the fear, the sleepless nights, how our children had changed, how we had been forced to live like prisoners in our own home. I took the stand last. I told the truth, plain and simple. I didn't fire that shot because I wanted to. I fired it because a maniac was about to hurt my wife. I didn't fortify my ranch because I like living in fear. I did it because I had no choice. Because we had a right to live free and safe on the land we had worked so hard to make ours. The judge listened carefully, her face unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm and clear. The court finds no evidence of criminal wrongdoing on the part of the defendants. The lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, a full investigation will be conducted into Horizon West Development, the HOA, and their activities within the county. It wasn't just a victory. It was a beginning, a crack in the armor of the machine that had tried to crush us. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us, microphones thrust into our faces. I kept it simple. We just want to live in peace, I said. We just want to be left alone. We drove home in silence, the weight of the long battle lifting slowly from our shoulders. The ranch came into view, the fences standing strong, the fields bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Laura reached across the truck cab and squeezed my hand. We were battered, bruised, but unbroken. They had tried everything to take our home, our family, our lives, and we had stood our ground.